confess?
Right here.
Kindly
Bus is clear to
subscribe and
proceed.
comment
Close
where
it
you're
up.
watching from. Tonight we're going inside a place I'll call Ironvale Penitentiary, a maximum security prison built so far out in the countryside that the bus ride there feels like you're leaving normal life behind. And this story is about one inmate, an accountant named Draxel Oyen. And the one decision that turned him from just another number into the man who almost broke the system from the inside. When Draxel first arrived at Ironvale, he wasn't dangerous, he wasn't a gang leader, he wasn't built for violence, he was the quiet type who understood numbers, systems, loopholes, and he was sentenced for white-collar crime that cost the wrong people a lot of money, the kind of conviction where the paperwork looks clean but the politics behind it are dirty. When he stepped off the transport bus, he saw the usual prison scene: towers, razor wire, guards with bored expressions, but the first thing that hit him wasn't the noise, it was the smell coming from the main building, a stale chemical odor mixed with something he couldn't name, and one of the older inmates behind him muttered, "That's the building that eats people," before a guard shoved them forward and told them to shut up. Intake was fast and cold: strip, shower, orange cloth, ID band, photos, and Draxel tried to stay calm, telling himself if he just followed the rules and kept his head down he could survive his years and get out, but Ironvale wasn't that type of place. Because inside this prison, survival wasn't about following rules, it was about understanding who actually controlled what, and it didn't take long for Draxel to notice something strange. The guards were tense around the administrative wing, even though that should have been the safest part of the prison. On his third day he was assigned to laundry detail, a boring but useful job because laundry workers saw staff uniforms, movement patterns, and sometimes, accidental, documents left in pockets. And that's where he met a thin, sharp-eyed inmate named Brixton Hale, a guy who'd been inside Ironvale for 15 years and had survived riots, lockdowns, and gang wars by doing one thing better than anyone else: watching. Brixton told Draxel straight, "You're not built for this place, but your head might save you if you shut up and listen." And for a while, that's all it was: an old convict telling a new one how to move, when to talk, when to keep his eyes down, who to avoid in the yard. Which guards were quick to escalate, which ones pretended to be helpful but were actually fishing for information to sell back to other inmates. Then one day, a rumor started, quiet at first, only whispered in laundry, kitchen, and the law library. Ironvale was about to become a model facility, which sounded nice on paper but made everyone inside nervous, because every time a prison tries to look good on the outside, it usually gets worse on the inside. The administration started talking about a new rehabilitation program funded by a private research partner, something about behavioral restructuring and voluntary participation, and they were offering time cuts, better food, and extra visitation for anyone who joined. Most inmates didn't trust it. Nobody trusts anything that sounds generous inside a cage, but some guys signed up anyway because desperation is its own kind of hunger. Draxel ignored it at first, but then he saw the paperwork in laundry: new lab coats in staff uniforms, badges with a logo that wasn't state-issued, and forms printed with the words, Nexus Initiative, Tier 3 Cognitive Pilot, and his brain, trained to catch patterns and inconsistencies, started asking questions his mouth was smart enough not to say out loud. The first big red flag came one afternoon when an inmate from Draxel's tier vanished, not sent to the infirmary, not to segregation, just gone, and when Draxel casually asked Brixton about it, the older man said, he volunteered for Nexus, then added, nobody volunteering for that comes back the same, if they come back at all. A week later, that same inmate reappeared at Chow, looking healthier, calmer, smiling in a way that didn't fit the sound of Ironvale's steel and concrete, and everyone around him kept just a little bit of distance, because even though his body was there, his eyes were wrong, too quiet, too flat, like someone turned down the volume on his emotions. Over the next month, more inmates joined Nexus, and a pattern started. The angriest ones got calmer, the unpredictable ones got obedient, fights dropped, yard incidents went down, and the warden walked around with a smug look like he'd discovered the cure for crime. Ironvale started getting visits from suits with polished shoes and clipboards, walking through the tiers, staring at inmates like they were data points, and one day, a woman in a dark blazer with a calm, precise voice came into laundry with two guards, pointed at Draxel, and said, "This one," like selecting a file from a shelf. the guards took him to an office he'd never seen before, deeper in the admin wing, where the fluorescent light didn't flicker, the walls were freshly painted, and there was a glass window looking into a room with a chair bolted to the floor and a machine connected to a panel full of lights and touch screens, and the woman introduced herself as Dr. Silith Nyong, lead coordinator for the Nexus initiative. She laid his file in front of him and told him without smiling, "We can shorten your sentence by a third, maybe more, if you agree to help us with our work." And when he asked what exactly that work was, she talked like a politician, using words like cognitive recalibration, behavioral stability, and safe, non-invasive modulation, but never clearly saying what happens once you sit in that chair. Draxel, unlike most people they'd recruited, actually read the consent form, and hidden under layers of jargon he found phrases that made his stomach drop, terms like non-disclosed side effects, alteration of emotional response index, and long-term neurological variability unknown, and it hit him. This wasn't therapy, it was experimentation with a nicer font. He told Silith he'd think about it, and she gave him a look that felt like a scanner moving across his face and said, "You're exactly the kind of mind we want, Draxel. Ironvale wastes men like you, we don't." And then she let him go. Back in laundry, Brixton watched him carefully and said, "They tapped you, didn't they?" And when Draxel nodded, Brixton leaned closer and said, "You're not the first smart man they've tried to recruit. Only difference is the last one thought he was smarter than them, and he never made it back to general population." And that's when our story really starts, because instead of saying yes or no, Draxel decided to do something nobody expected inside a place built to crush initiative. He played along just enough to get close, just enough to see behind the program, and then he quietly started building the one thing Ironvale didn't account for, a network that existed in whispered words, coded laundry tags, trades of cheap pencils for fragments of observed routines, and the oldest currency in any locked system, information. From here on, I'm going to keep it blunt, because this is the part of the story where most channels would start dramatizing things and adding fake details just to make it sound crazier, but the truth is already crazy enough, and if you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed, because what Draxel uncovered inside Ironvale's Nexus program is exactly the kind of thing that would never make it into an official report. After that first meeting with Dr. Silith, he didn't refuse, he didn't sign either. He stayed neutral in a way that made him look hesitant but not rebellious, and that bought him time, the most valuable thing in a prison where every second is a transaction. He started documenting patterns like he used to track transactions in the outside world: who went into Nexus, how often, how long they were gone, how they acted when they came back. And in laundry he used tiny dots in different positions on garment tags as a code only he and Brixton understood, marking which inmates had attended which sessions. They noticed 3 levels. Level 1 participants came back relaxed, less likely to argue, almost grateful. Level 2 had a delayed reaction. 2 or 3 days later they became emotionally flat, like someone muted their anger and fear. Level 3, those were the ones who came back with that same hollow eyes look he'd seen on the first volunteer. And some of them started doing something much more dangerous than fighting. They started defending the program, insisting it helped, calling it the only thing that makes this place livable, repeating phrases that sounded less like their own words and more like the brochure they'd never seen. Draxel realized Nexus wasn't just changing behavior, it was rewriting loyalty. One evening, during count, an inmate named Jurev, who'd never spoken a kind word about the administration in 5 years, stood up and calmly told the guard that Nexus was the future of corrections, a sentence so out of character the whole tier went dead quiet. That night, Draxel whispered to Brixton, "They're not just calming people down, they're manufacturing agreement," and Brixton replied, "Yeah, an agreement is the one thing they never got from us before. That's why they're so happy." The turning point came when Nexus launched their food improvement phase, something the yard rumors initially laughed at because everyone knows prison food is the last thing any administration cares about, but suddenly the chow hall got cleaner trays, hotter meals, and weirdly precise portions, like someone had calculated exactly how many calories each man needed and refused to give a gram more. At first it didn't seem connected, just a random upgrade, but Draxel watched who got the better food, and surprise, it matched his laundry-coded list. Men in Nexus got meals with richer color, higher protein, more flavor, And their trays were always spotless, while non-participants still got bland slop. Dr. Sileth presented it as nutritional support for neurological stability, but Draxel saw what it really was: another lever to pull behavior with, another way to separate the controlled from the uncontrolled. When the administration announced mandatory initial screening for all inmates, not full participation yet, just evaluation, they finally got their hand inside every tier. And Draxel made what looked like a stupid decision from the outside. He volunteered to go first from his block. The guards were surprised, the staff pleased, and Sileth looked at him with that same scanner gaze and said, "Good, I knew you wouldn't waste your potential hiding in routine work." And that's how he got into the room nobody else in general population could fully describe: a small, white space with soft walls, a chair bolted to the floor, and a device that didn't look like anything he'd seen in a hospital or lab, a ring of panels arranged above head level, each one faintly humming with low-frequency sound. They strapped a band around his head that felt like a mix of rubber and metal and told him to stare straight ahead at a dot on the wall while the lights dimmed. The test started gentle, just memory questions, guided breathing, a calm voice telling him to imagine safe places. Then it shifted. The questions became more invasive. When did you first feel powerless? Who do you blame for your sentence? What would you sacrifice to reduce your time? And the hum in the machine climbed so slowly his body almost didn't notice, but his trained mind did, counting each increase like ticking interest. At a certain point, something clicked. His thoughts felt like they lagged a half-second behind his own intentions. Like someone was tapping the brakes in his head, testing how much influence they could apply before he noticed, and that's when he understood the real danger. This wasn't a blunt attempt to control his mind, it was a precise attempt to map his thresholds, the exact pressure at which suggestion became compliance. When it ended, Sileth smiled slightly and said, "Exceptional tolerance, Draxel, your cognitive grid is remarkably resilient," and he forced his voice to stay flat as he answered, "Does that mean I pass?" And she said, "It means you're eligible for deeper work, the way a recruiter might say, you're eligible for promotion." Over the next few weeks he kept playing his role, asking small, strategic questions like a man half curious and half skeptical. What's the long-term plan? Why only Ironvale? Why the food changes? And she gave him pieces, never the whole thing, but enough for someone like him to put together. The Nexus initiative wasn't just about Ironvale. It was a pilot, a proof of concept to show private investors and state officials that you could take a violent, overcrowded facility and turn it into a calm, compliant, low-incident fortress, not by hiring more staff, but by tuning the brains locked inside. And the food was the delivery system for the second stage, traces of compounds designed to make the brain more responsive to the machine's frequencies and suggestions. One afternoon, while folding uniforms, Brixton told Draxel a story from before Nexus, about an earlier attempt to pacify a block with stronger sedatives mixed into the food, and how it backfired, dulling everyone so much that the place became dangerous in a different way, like a building full of sleepwalkers. Nexus was smarter, it didn't want zombies, it wanted sharpened compliance, men who could work, answer, and function but never truly resist. With that realization, Draxel made his choice. He wasn't going to hide, and he wasn't going to just escape either, because even if he got paroled, Nexus would spread to other prisons, turning whole populations into programmable units. So he did the one thing nobody expects from the quiet guy in the background. He turned offense. Using what he learned from each session, he started deliberately failing in certain emotional responses while overperforming in others, feeding the machine false patterns, creating noise in the data. And when he got back to the block, he quietly taught a few other smart men how to do the same without using technical language. Simple instructions like, when they ask about anger, smile inside your head, not on your face, or, when they talk about fear, remember a boring memory, not a painful one, essentially poisoning the algorithm they were building. At the same time he began logging everything, not on paper that would be easily found, but inside places the administration barely noticed. Tiny etched marks in the metal frame under laundry presses, coded scratches in the back row of the law library shelves, memorized sequences shared verbally between men who passed each other in the yard like strangers. The breaking point came when Nexus scheduled a full, Phase 3 rollout, a multi-day cycle where an entire tier would be processed one by one through deeper sessions. Ironvale went eerily quiet, fewer fights, fewer outbursts, more men lining up voluntarily for evaluations, and at the staff level, there was an air of celebration, like a company about to hit its numbers. What Silith didn't know was that Brixton and Draxel had already arranged something that didn't require violence or riots, something far worse for a data-driven project: corruption of results. The night before Phase 3, a half-dozen key participants from Draxel's coded list sat in the dark of their cells and rehearsed mental drills to scramble pattern recognition, recounting multiplication tables when asked about childhood, silently reciting random numbers during emotional exposure, flipping their strongest memories upside down by intentionally attaching calm breathing to images that were supposed to trigger stress. When Phase 3 began, the machine did its job perfectly. The lights glowed, the hum pulsed, the staff observed, but the readings were wrong in a way they didn't immediately understand. Graphs flat where they should spike, spikes where they expected stability, outliers clustering instead of scattering. By the third day, Silith's calm tone cracked for the first time, and Draxel could see it in her posture as she watched him through the glass on his next session. She knew something in the environment had shifted, but she didn't yet realize it was the environment learning her, not the other way around. And this is where I'm going to stop for now, because part 2 has to end somewhere, and if you want me to go deeper into how Draxel forced the program to collapse in on itself, what price he paid, and whether Ironvale actually changed or just rebranded its methods, you're going to have to let me know in the comments. Hit subscribe, and tell me if you're ready for the final part of this story, because it only gets darker from here, but not in the way Hollywood would write it, in the way systems really break when the wrong person understands them too well from the inside.